Hello and welcome to Exploring Intersections. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you're joining us from. I'm your host, Meenakshi Iyer. I also serve as the founder and principal of North Star Solutions and Services, where I partner with technology executives and senior leaders in technology to help them better support their mid-level leaders in their people and leadership change leadership journeys. I've had a 25 plus year career in the world of technology, and in my current role as a personal agility and self-leadership coach, I bring the experience from my interdisciplinary career in service of particularly the mid-career segment. And I prioritize working with women in tech and folks like myself who speak English as an additional language. So exploring intersections is something that I've been doing for a few months now. I want to say a little over a year. And this is a space that's dedicated to unpacking intersections as we co-create a future work that works for everyone. So what we typically do here in these conversations, if this is your first time, well, welcome. And I would love to know in the chat where you're joining us from and what are you looking forward to hearing today. I also want to take a moment to welcome and thank everyone that will catch the replay. We are currently live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And in this forum, I have the privilege of having some meaningful conversations with guests from around the world on topics such as physical and mental well-being, head and heart of leadership, leadership and coaching. So these are some of the recent conversations that I've had. And I invite you to check them out on our YouTube channel, North Star Solutions and Services, and or from the previous LinkedIn posts or on our Facebook page as well. So something that's been on my mind lately is, especially with all the chatter around artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and whatnot, is how are these systems and these new technologies that are coming about, how do they account for equity? And I wanted to particularly focus on gender equity. And so today's intersection that we're going to be digging in is the intersection of gender, technology, and research. And to help us unpack this intersection, we have our guest, Rucha Kapara, who's joining us all the way from Pune, India. Thank you for joining us, Rucha.
Thank you, Meenakshi, and thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So Rucha and I met in person just a few months ago at the Agile Practitioners Group of India, their Agile 5.0 conference in Pune. And I had the privilege of attending Rucha's session on allyship. And I had so many takeaways from that conversation, from that presentation, Rucha, and also our conversation right after that. And so when I started thinking about this intersection, you were the first person that came to mind, given your unique background. And I want to share that a little bit more about that, and then I'd invite you to share more about how you came to be where you are today and the different intersections in your own career. Yeah. So Rucha is an agile practitioner with more than a decade of experience in software and product development. And the unique thing, at least for me, about Rucha and her career and her current focus is her belief in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, being essential to creating a productive and innovative workplace. And how she combines that with her knowledge of agile practices and principles, and how she helps her teams and her audiences, because she's a well-known speaker in this space, to incorporate DEI principles into the Agile framework to help create more inclusive and collaborative teams. And she is particularly committed to allyship and researcher diversity and has spoken on this topic at many conferences. So the reason why I thought of you, Rucha, as I started thinking about this topic is, one is our conversation in after your presentation, in Pune, and I'm sure we'll get into that today.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, again, this chatter around how technology that's being designed, uh, accounting for equity becomes almost like an afterthought, and how that affects the experience across the board, and how we are missing out on such key elements in designing the technology. So, something that has been on my mind for a while is, for example, uh, cars when they are manufactured. It was not until I think about 5, 6 years ago that they actually had a woman's body as a model for crash testing. Otherwise, a smaller man's body, the mannequin, that was used for testing. And so it's no surprise that more than 70% of car crashes are fatal for women. And so it's things like these, like why don't women's outfits have pockets?
Tell me about it.
Right? So things like these, once you start observing, you can't sort of unsee them. So anyway, so I wanted to dig into some of those things with you, and understand your experience at this intersection. So over to you, Rucha. Tell us about how you came to be at where you are.
Thank you so much, first of all, for the very flattering introduction. I hope I'm able to do justice to it. But you're one of those people, I feel it's been a couple of months we met for the first time, right? And
Yes.
that was the only time we met in person.
Yes.
But it feels like we struck a chord immediately. It's like one of those people who you feel like you've known forever, because that's the kind of wavelength match we had. And I'm
Yes.
glad we met. So how I came into this field. So I started as a business analyst right after my engineering career, and I worked with Accenture and then with a multinational organization. Currently, I work with Springer Nature as the global head of DEI for external data. And when I say external, I'll come to that in a bit. But I started with business analysis, still a BA at heart. I went on to then lead a team on business analysis and then heading an entire department. It was only last year, because I was juggling between a couple of roles and I was working on a few DI initiatives already. I decided to take the plunge full time into this role. More so, because this is not the area that I'm working on, though I'm passionate about DEI in general. This area was related to DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion for the researchers.
Mm.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that example around cars. So the way people look at research always is, it's some scientist working in a lab, and what they do is of no concern to us as like common people. But
Mm.
it's a good reminder for us. Everything we do in the world today is the research of yesterday, right? Be it the vaccines you take, the technology you use, even the cars you use have been researched a few years ago or maybe even a few months ago, and you're
Yes.
now using it in your day to day life. Now imagine these products being designed or developed by people who are like very, very similar. And when I say similar, it's not just gender, it could be geography, it could be career stages, it could be even the social background they come from, even the
Yes.
cultural background they come from. So relating back to your car example, it was not until 10 years back that these dummies started changing. And this does not just affect women, this affects teenagers like
Yes.
who are eligible for driving. This affects people with disabilities. This affects elderly people as well.
Correct.
Was this intentional? Like the accidents faced by people who are not men, if they end up in one, are really very fatal. So much so that the fatalities are as high as 70 to 80% if they meet an accident. I'm pretty sure this was not intentional, right? Like whoever designed it, it was not intentional. But you can imagine, like the product development chain is quite huge,
Mm.
right? There's design, there is prototyping, then there's a phase of building it, then there's a phase of testing it, and then
Yep.
there's a phase of productionizing it. So you can imagine if it was not caught in any of these stages, it essentially means that They were not those pair of eyes to see it. Probably it was just similar people working on it. Had there been a person who was not a man on that team, probably they would have caught it. So it's not intentional, but we need to make intentional efforts to incorporate things.
Yes, yes, so beautifully said, Rucha. And two things came up for me as you were sharing that. One is, you know, the exercise you had made us do in your workshop. I'm forgetting the title of it.
The
Like,
trusted six.
yes, yes, the Trusted Six. And I want you to share about that with us. And the other thing is that car manufacturing is close to, I don't know, 150 years old at least, and
Yep, and
it's not until 10 years ago that we made it really inclusive.
yeah, and that's like still a big example. Like it's very easy to ignore it because we've just accepted the fact, right? Like the pockets example that you've given, I've just accepted the fact and I've started buying a smaller phone which I can hold literally, like, and I
Mm.
don't even get a smaller phone which I can hold normally in my hand. Like all phones are so big
Yes.
and everyone wants to, and I'm pretty sure there's audience for those phones as well. But these are the smaller things that need to be considered because there is a market for things like this. Relating to the example that you gave, another example that I have is PWDs, which is people with disabilities.
Mm.
Right, when we build our products we never think of them, or we
Yes.
barely think about them,
Yes.
and they account to almost 1.5 billion people in the world.
Mm.
Now imagine if you build products not just for them but with them. Like if you have diverse teams who have people catering to those groups, you are going to build better products. You're going to gain their trust. You're going to gain a lot of audience in them. So you not only affect them but also their friends and family. They
Mm.
are automatically going to become your customers. So that accounts to around 3.5 billion people. That's
Mm.
more than half the
Half the
world's
population.
population.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you age, you tend to acquire one or more disability,
Yes.
right? And people at that age have a lot of income to dispose most of the times because they're earned. Now imagine you are not catering to this group. You're literally going to throw away millions of dollars of money.
Yes.
So it's good for business.
Yes.
It definitely has a big business case, but it also has a legal case, right? In a lot of countries you are mandated to do certain things, but
Mm.
most importantly the reason I feel for this cause is it's the right thing to do. There's also a social case to do things.
Yes. Yes. And we have here Viswajit here who agrees with you with what you've said. Thank you for joining us live, Viswajit, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. Um, and you know, as you were saying, it's to me, it's also really sad that we have to make a business case for all these things, which are, you know, really common sense based, to be honest.
Yeah,
And the other point you made is, like, for example, making buildings entry into buildings accessible for people who use a wheelchair, for example, or any other mobility limiting disability. You're actually making life easier for a lot of other people, and
yeah,
this has been proven here. You know, there are examples here. So for example, if you have a main entry that's accessible to people who use a wheelchair, then it makes life easier for other folks like senior citizens, pregnant
yeah,
women, people with stuff in their hand, delivery folks, your UPS and your FedEx folks. So I could not agree with you more that when you really design for people whom we may consider not mainstream, you're actually making life more accessible to a much bigger population,
yeah.
right?
And this is exactly where research comes into picture because research
Mm.
is also about understanding your audience well. It's not just like research that we consider mainstream, which is developing a vaccine. This is also a research in a way where you understand who your customers are. If you're designing something accessibility wise, you are spot on. It's also going to be for women. It's also expecting mothers. It's going to be for a lot of other people who
Yes.
might not be able for a certain amount of time, who have fractures and things like those.
Yes, yes. And as you were talking about, as we age, we tend to um,
Acquire.
acquire at least one or two disabilities, and that's so true. Our physical abilities are temporary, even if we are fully able-bodied people, right?
And it's such an interesting thing. I think someone had mentioned this to me, that whenever you looked at people who are differently abled, they call us temporarily abled bodies. We
Hmm.
are temporarily able bodies, like whoever according to us is like an abled person is like a temporarily abled person,
Correct.
because you never know, right? Like
Yes.
what can happen. Like, of course, positively we don't want things to happen, but you never know when sides flip, which is why also I say, privileges are very fluid. You never
Yes.
know when they shift.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Wow. This is fantastic. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Before we dig into this more, can you talk to us about that exercise that you had us do, the trusted six?
Yes, I would love to. So, this exercise, what you literally have to do is take a piece of paper, think of six people who you trust, who you go to for your decision making in your personal and professional lives. Write down those names on the extreme left, and I'm Meenakshi happy to share a template with you in case you want to attach it later for people to do it. And then what you do is you add a few parameters. You add a few parameters like gender, maybe age, educational qualification, marital status. So these attributes can vary to race and ethnicity, cultural background, social background, economic background, even. So pick, say, five things, and for the first person who you trust, and here I'm going to explain it with an example. Say if it is my mother, who I go to for reference, then what I would do is say this is the first person I trust. I'll see if the gender is the same. Of course it is same, so I will not do anything. I'll just keep it a blank. So you have to draw like a matrix with
Hmm.
people on the left and then the attributes on the top. Attributes again being gender, profession, age, all diversity aspects, as many as you can think of. So if I have to compare with the first, say it's my mother, Shailaja, and her gender, so it's the same. I do nothing. I just leave that cell blank. The next one that I go to is age. So her age is of course a lot more than mine. You don't have to be precise. Plus minus five is okay. So it's different to mine. So I put a cross there.
Hmm.
Third parameter could be education qualification. So her qualification is very different to mine. So I put a cross.
Hmm.
Moving on, say her marital status is same as mine. I just leave it blank as is. Then say ability or disability, and this is just visible or non-visible. So it could
Hmm.
also be things around mental health. So
Correct.
uh, I assuming everything is okay. I say none of us have it, so I'm just going to leave it blank.
Yes.
Now you repeat this for all the people on your list, right? And then you count the number of crosses.
Hmm.
Essentially, these are the number of differences that you have.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's like not that you should get more than half the crosses. It's just a reflection exercise for you to see how diverse your network is,
Hmm.
right? And once you know, you might choose to not changes. For example, when I did this exercise for the first time in action, I shared it with you. It was such an aha, eye opening moment for me, because what I felt is everyone on my list was so similar that I literally made decisions and it felt like I went to them to validate it, just to satisfy or massage my ego, rather
Hmm.
than getting a real feedback or a real opinion on something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do I have to change it? Probably not. It's my choice. But if I have to grow out of my bubble, I made a conscious choice of changing that network for myself.
Yeah.
And then you can do this exercise with 10 people as well, which is the trusted 10.
Hmm.
Six is just to begin with to
Yeah.
reflect on things.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Richa. I remember being in the room when you made us all do this exercise, and it is truly eye opening. And, as you were sharing this, as I was hearing you again, I realized that this is, in a way, making research very accessible at an individual level, right? You're just looking at who do you spend most of your time with? Who do you reach out for advice or opinions, and and what are the inputs you're taking while you make decisions. And we all know that there are some things that are deeply personal, but decisions we make as individuals have an impact on everyone in our ecosystem. So this is such a fantastic, the Trusted Six is such a fantastic way for us to get started on doing a little bit of research, a reflective study of our own inner circle. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
No problem. And as it said, it's all about perspectives. You just look
Mm,
at things with the same eye, unless someone tells you like there are different ways of looking at the same thing.
yes,
And
yes,
it's like a different way to look at your relations.
yes, absolutely. So, this is a perfect segue. I want to hear from you. What does this intersection of gender, technology, and research mean to you? Excuse me, especially in your current role. So, if you can talk to us a little bit more about that, as to what is your perspective on this intersection.
I'm literally living this intersection right now. So, as I mentioned, if you talk about gender, I do care about gender. I'm also working on uh, Sustainable Goal 5, that is United Nations SDGs 5, which is around gender equality.
Mm,
The 17 goals, and what United Nations says is like whatever you do has an impact on things surrounding you. So, yes, I deeply care for gender. Again, just a quick reminder, gender for me is not just women, it is also non binary and other underrepresented groups. Technology, I am a technology person, right? That's what I'm very passionate about. And I'm a woman in technology. That's like a bigger intersection that I have.
yes.
And I work with Springer Nature. So Springer Nature is the world's second biggest publishing house. It is also the number one in a few aspects as well, and it's essentially a research organization. And in research, there are a lot of biases that exist, and all
Mm,
publishers acknowledge this. And these biases could be, say, geographic biases. For example, a research published from Asia might not be as cited or as considered compared to the research published from the US.
mm,
So this is a geographic bias. Likewise, there are gender biases. For
yes.
example, if you look at fields like mathematics or even politics, the representation of other genders apart from men is barely anything.
Yes.
It's like literally a single digit as well sometimes, including everyone. But on the flip side, if you look at subjects like literature and education, the representation of men is very, very less. So
Mm,
that there's like a clear divide in areas like these. So though I'm not a researcher, I am working in an area which has to do with researcher diversity for the same reasons as I mentioned to you earlier, because we consume this research every day as common people. And if it is not done by diverse people, trust me, we won't even realize it until a few years when there are more crashes or there are more things which are not usable, and only then we'll realize. So why do we have to wait for so long, right? Look at the kind of opportunities we are missing and the innovation that could happen if we make research not just available for all but also by all. So
mm,
it's not just for all but by all, and hence Springer Nature is working with the researchers to ensure that we remove biases in publishing and there is diversity in the researchers we engage with. And that's essentially an area that I am working with right now to ensure this diversity in research. So
mm,
that's kind of an intersection for me. And technology, I'm really passionate about. I feel technology uplifts any area, be it edtech, fintech, or you name it, and we have it. Technology is like a very, very big enabler, especially emerging tech can do wonders in a field like this, especially in uplifting gender equality in the area of research. And
mm,
that's where, I relate to this intersection a lot. Rather, this is very different to the role that I was doing as a business analyst. And
yeah.
Springer Nature is an organization which leads by purpose. It has a very, very strong purpose attached to it, which is why I decided to take up this role. It was a big risk in a way to move away from something that I deeply cared about, but this this is the happiest and the most satisfied I've ever been in my career, because I'm able to use what I know. I'm able to learn something new, which is getting expertise on DEI, and I know this is going to make an impact to the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's fantastic, Rucha. And I have to tell you this that and any and all women in tech that are watching live and that'll watch the replay, I hope you caught that fantastic bit of career advice that Rucha threw in there. I love what you said. You in your current role, you are working using what you already know, learning something new, and then you know you're creating impact, and that's such a fulfilling space to be. And I also heard you talk about how you took a risk, and that was a risk in your personal career. I mean, you could have just very well stayed on course of what you were doing because you were so successful with that. And so this whole thing about how Ginny Rometty talks about growth and comfort don't coexist. And that's what came to mind as you were sharing that. And the other thing that came up for me as you were talking about gender in research, uh, this bit of uh, a data point that I remember reading is during COVID, it there was an uptick in the number of submissions by researchers who are men, who identify as men, and a direct proportional decrease in the number of submissions made by everyone that identifies as woman. And this was and digging deeper into this was, it really showed the impact that the pandemic had, the disproportionate impact that it had on women who were saddled with so many responsibilities of caregiving and other things on all fronts, that their careers sort of took a backseat during the pandemic. I want to hear more from you around this, particularly in the context of research.
Yep. So it's like research in general. It's not it's a problem statement, not specific to a publisher, but
Yes,
overall. So
yes,
a lot of so researchers can really be very busy people. Just to give you some background,
yeah,
and when they publish a paper, it is over and above a full-time job they might have.
yes,
So these people could be doctors, PhDs, scientists working in a lab, or even professors. And when they write a research, it could be out of interest, or it could be out of some commitment they would have to, like securing your PhD. So you have to make certain amount of submissions. Now researchers are not just authors; they could also be reviewers. For example, if I'm as an author, if I'm writing a piece of paper and I make a submission, which is like an article, it's never going to be published in the same form it was written.
mm,
Imagine I write it for my field of expertise, which is biotechnology, as an example. It will come to you as an SME of biotechnology to review. Like
mm,
finding a reviewer in itself is very difficult. And these reviewers are doing this for the love of science. They are not employed by any publisher. So you
mm,
can imagine the same person to be, owning a lab, working on their own experiments, even writing their own papers sometimes related to those, juggling between the personal lives, and now they also have to review, right? So during the pandemic, because people got ample amount of time in general, I'm not talking about gender specifically, and also a lot of publishers including Springer Nature made a lot of research available, especially to expedite vaccine generation, which is like really very gracious, making a lot of research available for free. So people had a lot of time to consume research and also to produce research. So I hope the background story helped. And as you rightly said, there was a spike in the number of research submitted, or the number of submissions that came into publishers. But also there was a dip in the number of submissions made from specific genders because of responsibilities
mm,
people had. And these could be any kind of responsibilities. Some had childcare responsibilities, some had like elderly people they had to care for. And to be honest, this is not just a situation in a research. When
Yes.
I looked around an office and people struggling to see, how they're adjusting and juggling between office hours, homeschooling, it is such a tough thing to do. Looking, caring for elderly, especially during times when you had to be even more secure and sensitive towards whatever is happening around. It has impacted all of us, I would say, like
Yes.
researchers, technologists, and I'm pretty sure other areas as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I so appreciate you sharing the context and giving us a glimpse of the research world. I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to take a moment to once again welcome anyone that has just now joined us. So we are at Exploring Intersections, talking to Rucha Kapare about the intersection of gender, technology, and research. And Rucha has been sharing with us her own career journey at this intersection that led her to this intersection, and why this intersection is important to her. So, in continuing the conversation, Rucha, I wanted to hear from you a little bit more about your lived experience at this intersection, and your own intersectional identity. And I saw in your post yesterday you mentioned intersectionality, and Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined this term more than 30 years ago now, as we all know. And it was in the legal context and the impact that Black women in the US faced because of their race and their gender, and how that the intersection of those two identities put them in a place of disadvantage. And that's where it originally was coined. And we all know that each of us, regardless of who we are, where we come from, we have many layers in our identity. And that can put us in a place of privilege or put us in a place of disadvantage. And like you rightly pointed out earlier, Rucha, privilege is also fleeting. And so, given that you are an Indian woman in the space, in the technology space, and at this intersection of technology and research, what's been your own lived experience with your gender and your intersectional identity?
That's a very, very interesting question. And until a few years ago, I did not even know about this term intersectionality. And since the time I knew about it, I'm absolutely in love with it, because I know all of us are so different and unique. But when I say XYZ person is a woman, that person is not just a woman. That person might be a mother or a single mother, also caring for parents, might have some condition, maybe is neuro divergent, and things like those. So you can't just look at a person from a single lens. There are many layers to that person. And for me, this intersection has been a bittersweet thing, more sweet than bitter. Starting with my education, I think I have been superly, if that's even a word, privileged to get a good education, to be brought up in a family where my parents were really very liberal. And that's how things were for me in school. I never felt there was any difference. Even in junior college, which is like considered 11th and 12th grade here, and even in engineering, and I pursued software engineering. Yes, I could see the number of girls in my class was a bit less, but that never occurred as a problem per se to me. It was just maybe, or I was not observant enough, or maybe I did not even think of it as a problem back then. It was only when I entered a professional environment, reality struck, and I understood, how things are. I did not even know what DI is maybe until a few years ago. And maybe it was not even needed in the life that I had, because
Yeah.
that was how life should have been lived. There were no differences between my siblings and myself. Likewise, in school and college, everything was almost equal for all of us. Uh, Coming to a professional world, the real problem occurred when I was trying to switch jobs after my first one. And in one of the interviews, rather after the interviews, I was being asked, what are my plans of, getting married and getting settled.
Hmm.
In my view, I'd never been more settled in my life, because that was the first time I was earning by myself.
Yeah.
I had paid off my education loan. I was also contributing to the household. So if that was not settling, like that was the most settled I was in my life for the very first time. But that's not how it was perceived,
Yeah.
right? And then The same with a few other things as well. And sometimes when you enter, like the more you climb up the ladder, the more you realize that whenever you're entering a boardroom, and this is the experience that I faced in one of the organizations I worked for. Sometimes you could be the only person who looks like yourself,
Yeah.
and you can immediately sense it from the body language that hey, you don't belong here.
Mm.
And unknowingly people have made me feel that way. But I was also lucky enough to have more people who have countered that. I was incredibly lucky to, have found mentors, coaches, even sponsors who have helped me immensely to nurture myself, my skills, to pull me out of that rabbit hole sometimes when I was deep into it. And I just try to give back to people, whatever I can with the immense things people have done for me.
Mm.
I just try to give that. So that's my lived experience of, intersection of gender and technology. Of
Mm.
course, there's another intersection of technology and research, like working as a business analyst on a technology team, working for researchers. One thing that I've realized is things are very, very different. Their world and our world was very different. The language we speak,
Mm.
uh, the ways of working,
Mm.
because when you build technology products for someone, you almost assume that the person is techno savvy. But if
Mm.
you look at researchers, especially very senior researchers, they don't even use technology. They barely use it, which makes you then realize how basic you'll have to go when you
Mm.
are creating solutions. And I also feel sometimes the most difficult problems have the most simple solutions.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that so I have been incredibly lucky to be at the center of both the worlds as a business analyst and
Mm.
understand, how this technology and research can come together, and now bringing in the gender aspect of it. So this intersection that I'm currently working on, I feel there's immense potential
Mm.
in enlarging the intersection in between, and it cannot happen overnight. So if you say tomorrow we want more leaders, more women leaders, or more non-binary leaders at the top, and we want to make it 50%, or say whatever percentage that you want to, it's not going to happen,
Mm.
because you have to work at the entry level. If
Yes.
there's nothing in the beginning of the funnel, how is anything going to come out of it? So you would have to look at graduate schools, even schools teach your children right from the beginning. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and then someone mentioned that, they tell stories to their children about, it's not just a prince is going to come for you. Sometimes it could be two princesses. Sometimes
Mm.
it could just be two very different people or two same people. So I think it's starting at home,
Mm.
things like these, starting at schools, starting at graduate schools, starting at entry level. So there's a program for early career researchers as well, where you hone their skills, you try to make them, you try to enable them. And eventually, when you look at things holistically, it can't just be focusing on gender or focusing on technology, because technology is an enabler. You can't just like say we're
Yes.
going to deliver technology solutions for who and how. I think that's where my experience of being at the center of these three intersections is.
Mm. That's wonderful, Richa. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And and I was nodding away, at least in my own head, as you were sharing, because um, even even with a 20-year age gap between us, my experience while I was studying in school and college, I moved to the US as an adult 15 years ago. So my entire experience in India, same thing. My parents, there was no, yes, from a societal rules and norms perspective, yes, my brother and I had different rules, but not in terms of access to opportunity. So when it came to education and uh, being financially independent and all of that, that's how my mother raised me. The focus was always you have to study, get a degree, get a job, and be financially independent. And those were the things that I grew up with. And in school and college, it's the same thing. I never experienced any sense of discrimination just because I was a girl.
Yeah, that's what I wonder. Like, the more we are literate, the more we are educated, it should be progressive, right? It should be
Mhm.
the other way around, which is what I wonder sometimes.
Yes, yes. I think when it comes to I had the same experience as you. Like when I entered the professional world, first few years were fine, but now when I look back, I think I didn't even know how to identify when there was discrimination. That's my lived experience, and I think one memory that I have, or one experience that I have, that I don't think I can ever forget, is now it's what, 20 plus years ago now, when I found it difficult to open a bank account as a single woman.
Oh,
And I was only able to open it when I found employment that allowed that, I had to have a salary account, and then they didn't care. But as an individual, if I didn't have employment records to show, for example,
yeah,
um, I had to involve or show documentation about my father, or I had to be married.
yeah.
As a single woman, it was difficult to open a bank account, and
And
that
that's the most basic thing, right? Like,
yes, yes. And I remember having a conversation with the banker, saying, "So, what do other women do? Like, is this going to work?" So I finally, yes. So my job is what helped me get a decent bank account. So it's interesting what you shared. So the reason I want to point this out is, a couple of decades have passed, and I think that the experience, lived experience, are still similar, and we have similar cultural and ethnic backgrounds. I wanted to share that. And the other thing that you said is how this intersection, or the impact of our gender identity, how that affects what we do at work, and creation of technology. I totally agree with you that technology is, at the end of the day, is an enabler, is there to solve human problems, enhance our human experience. And more often than not, if it doesn't include everyone in the co-creative process, it's not going to have the desired impact, or it will, but only for a sliver of the population and not for
yeah,
everyone,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. And just to add to what you mentioned, I absolutely agree. Like, I don't recall any experiences from the beginning of my career as well, because maybe I was so naive to not even notice it. What I really love about the millennials right now is they are so open, they know so much about the world, and it is such a good thing to have a conversation with them,
Hmm.
and they understand things so well, so I have the opposite impression of a lot of managers I speak to who think the generation is not sincere. I feel the opposite, right? They're really
Hmm.
very smart, and it's so good to know they would call a spade if they have to. They wouldn't just agree with you because you're the boss, which never should be the case. We are in a knowledge based industry, we're not in an age based industry anymore. So you should be able to
Yes.
point out
Yes.
things. And one of the things researchers, especially millennial researchers, have called out to publishers is we won't publish with publishers who don't care for issues of diversity.
Hmm.
That's the level to which a lot of researchers have gone, which is also like an alarm for most of the publishers to work on areas like these.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, that is very hopeful, isn't it? Thank you
Yes.
for sharing that. Yeah, yeah. So, Rucha, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, I wanted to ask you, and this is a little bit selfish of me as well, because I
Yeah.
focused on mid level leaders. So, I wanted to hear from you, how might leaders, and particularly mid level leaders, make the most of being at this intersection?
What I feel is the focus should be on self awareness first. A
Hmm.
lot of times it happens that there's a lot of talking, but we need to walk the talk.
Hmm.
We need to start ourselves, like bring out change inside out. And the most important thing is first acknowledge that a gap exists. A lot of people are still in denial. There are a lot
Hmm.
of things we as leaders need to unlearn and learn. And what I like is now people have started understanding DEI. What might be a good thing is putting the intersectionality lens on things. so that people really understand the context.
Mm,
Apart from that, what I feel is action speaks louder than words, right? If you lead by example, and it could be with respect to simple things. What I feel is, how do you eat an elephant? Though I'm a vegetarian, it's just an example. How do you eat an elephant is one bite at a time,
mm,
right? We've come a long way, but there is still a very, very long way to go. If I or anyone gives you a list of these are the 10 things you need to do, it's going to be overwhelming, right? Start small, start with some really basic things. Leading by example means, like, when you're addressing a group of people, use gender neutral language, using inclusive language. It's very important because the level at you are, there are a lot of people who are taking inspiration from you. There are a lot of people who are learning from you, especially the young generation who's just entered the workforce, right? So for me, it is leading by example, walking the talk, and most importantly, learning yourself. It's a journey. There never can be a possibility that everyone knows everything, especially in an area of DEI. So you need to constantly keep on learning things. And the fourth and the most important thing I feel is, you need to take intentional efforts. It's not going to happen automatically, right? If there are biases that exist, and if you don't put in intentional effort, they're going to amplify. Same with data and technology, right? Like,
yes.
if you don't intentionally do something around uh, removing biases, it's going to amplify with the use of technology, and that's really very scary.
Yes.
If you're
Yes.
feeding your own biases to machines, imagine the kind of outputs they're going to give to you.
Yes.
So now is the time we take a step back, we add that filter, and we act on things very, very intentionally.
Mm, mm. Thank you. Thank you so much. Such practical advice. I love what you said. Start small, start with self awareness, lead by example, and walk the talk. And the reminder that starting small is important and then taking one step at a time. Doing simple things like using inclusive language, for example, in meetings and things like that. Um, and any other parting thoughts before we wrap up?
Yes, just being a little selfish and talking about allyship, because that's a topic that I deeply relate to.
Yeah.
Also, because I have benefited tons from it,
Hmm.
and I would want people to know. So allyship, I think, is a word which people just understand in the context of LGBTQ plus community, which is not the case. An ally could be a person who supports you. It's a person who has the privilege. So if I have to tell a very, very short story, if there's an elephant and a mouse in the room, the elephant, the mouse needs to know of every move of the elephant, right? Like,
Hmm.
if the mouse has to survive, the mouse needs to know how the elephant moves, what is the routine like, what's the schedule. But that's not the case with for the elephant. The elephant can just survive
Just
fine
be.
without, yeah. So sometimes you're the elephant in the room,
Hmm.
sometimes you're the mouse in the room, based on
Hmm.
what privilege you are at. So if you are the elephant in the room, be an ally, be a support to the mouse in the room. It's very
Hmm.
important. That's the best way you can use your privilege. If you're privileged, it's not your fault. A lot of times it happens, right? Like, we look at people who are privileged, saying that, they're privileged, and make them feel as if it's a mistake. That's not the case. It's not their fault. What is important is you use that position and you
Hmm.
use that privilege to uplift people who really need it.
Hmm.
And my parting thought, I know it's a bit long, but is, in a world where you can be anything, be an ally to someone. It really changes the lives of people in ways you cannot imagine.
How wisely said, Lucha. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Uh, for wrapping up this conversation on such an inspiring and hopeful note. Really, really appreciate that. What's the best way for folks to connect with you?
I am available on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
and I'm pretty active. I usually respond to everything that comes my way. It might take a little time sometimes, but I'm happy to connect via LinkedIn. And then once we hit it off there, I can we can connect on different forums as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So once again, everyone that's watching live and folks that will watch the recording later, we have been talking to Rucha Kapara about the intersection of gender, technology, and research. And Rucha, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your lived experience, and your wisdom so generously with us. And wish you the best in everything that you take up. Thank you
Thank,
very much.
thank you so much, and thank you for again inviting me. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I hope
Likewise.
people do as well. But thank you. It was amazing having this conversation with you, actually.
Likewise, Rucha. Thank you very much. And a quick plug in for all the women in tech. So if you are a mid-level, mid-career woman in tech with anywhere from 8 to 15 years of industry experience, with or without a career break, doesn't matter. And if you speak English as an additional language, North Star Solutions and Services and we've created a virtual mentorship program. It's a global mentorship program called Building My Runway, and we are now accepting applications for the class of 2023. And the program starts on August 5. More details are available on my website and my earlier posts on LinkedIn, and I'll share some links in these show notes as well. So would love to invite applications from all of you who identify as a mid-career woman in tech. And if you have any more questions, you can contact me via LinkedIn or through my website. Once again, thank you very much, Rucha, and everyone here. Take care and be well. Until next time. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.